Commission Oversight Committee. No apologies for absence as yet, but I do know that some members are on their way. Oh, the clerk is advising that we have one apology from member Julian Robinson. Any other members?
No, I was just saying that I believe that that would have been expected since Member Robinson actually speaks today in Parliament.
Understood.
Yeah.
So just as a matter of opening remarks, I want to again thank members, thank all of the staff members who are assisting us, and just to reiterate the importance of this committee in terms of our work here being directly linked to advancing the legislative agenda from the Integrity Commission Act, which was created to advance this Commission of Parliament with its task to prevent, to detect, to investigate matters of corruption or alleged matters. And importantly, the committee is expected in its exercise of parliamentary oversight to ensure that the institutional arrangements and the design to protect the integrity in public life is wholesome and effective and efficient and transparent. So we have a lot of important work to do here, which is why we have been fitted with professionals to give us the necessary support to advance our work. And I do want to take the time to place on record, and for the benefit of members, as we welcome members to the committee, not just the significance of the committee's role, but to identify the parliamentary team that supports us, which comprises, welcome Member Campbell, the parliamentary team, which is comprised primarily of our committee clerk, legislative counsel, committee research officers, Hansard writers, and orderlies. And the committee clerk serves as the principal procedural and administrative officer of the committee. And it is proposed that members who need any support in that regard, you would simply advise the clerk and you will get that assistance in terms of all matters, preparing the agendas, any queries in that regard, recording of minutes, coordinating and arranging persons who would join us here to be interrogated, and generally just managing the circulation and custody of documents that will be placed before us for evaluation. The Legislative Council members, and I'm going through this just because we have new members and for your benefit. The Legislative Council, as a legal officer, will provide advice and analysis on matters that arise in relation to the interpretation of our standing orders as well as the committee's mandate. We have our research officers who support the committee as well by preparing background briefs, conducting research on matters under consideration, and assisting with the preparation or drafting of reports. Of course, we know the Hansard officer is responsible for recording and preparing of the transcript, and our orderlies who are always here with us in terms of all the other arrangements for committees and meetings. As it relates to procedural matters that will be advanced by the Integrity Commission Oversight Committee, I want it on the record, and again for the benefit of members, that we derive our mandate primarily from Standing Order 73D. And Standing Order 73D has in its own composition 5 elements. A, the monitoring and reviewing the performance of the functions of the Integrity Commission. B, reporting to both houses of Parliament on any matter relating to the performance of the functions of the Integrity Commission. C, reviewing the annual report and any other report of the Commission and submitting recommendations in relation thereto to both houses of Parliament. D, assessing the effectiveness of the Integrity Commission and the appropriateness of its procedures. And E, convening and considering a report submitted to Parliament under Section 36 of the Integrity Commission Act within 30 days of the submission of that report. And it is very important also that members take the time, I want to encourage you, to peruse, evaluate, become associated with the legislation, the Integrity Commission Act, as well as the relevant areas of the standing order as defined by the Act, and as as acknowledged a while ago, also Section 77(7) of the standing orders, which is relevant. As you go through, you will be reminded of the ethical standards. I won't go through that, and members will have the opportunity to read through the standing orders themselves. The powers and privileges of the committee, which includes our power and responsibility to invite or summon witnesses as required, request documents, receive written and oral evidence as required to advance our mandate. And of course, what is before us today, which when I reach section 5 of our agenda, I'll go into more intricate detail. The standing order also defines how we advance these meetings, and again, I encourage you to take the time to peruse it and to become comfortable with it, and to ensure that you note the timelines in which matters are to be addressed by the committee. Moving further on the agenda, unless there are any issues, any questions? If not, just to move quickly to the procedural matters at point 5, and to indicate to members it is not expected for us today to advance into much of the substantive issues, primarily because the matters before us are matters which were tabled, if that's the right terminology, previously tabled in two junctures, in December and in January. And so I have taken the liberty as chair to discuss with the Legislative Council and support staff, and to make a request for the committee to be appropriately guided as to the requisite and the right procedure in terms of our deliberation and how we would evaluate the reports, 4 reports that would be placed and are placed before us. Also, to be guided as well on the pathway, what then would occur after we address the procedural matters and those parameters to do with those reports. So if there is no objection from members, you would have had those reports placed before you. I'm assuming, Clark, that they were all sent to each member, and you would be able to note them, and you should then understand the gravity of the matter and can become acquainted. You'll have the time to become acquainted with the details. I'd encourage you all to read through. If there's any support that is required, I've already outlined for you and detailed the support staff. As chair, I am making myself available to all members. If there are any issues, any questions, any matters that are needed for me to direct you to the appropriate person. As I said, these matters that are before us, it is intended for us to get the proper guidance through a legal opinion, and thereafter at the next meeting, perhaps before the meeting, I can provide you with the information, so the next meeting of the committee would be a more substantive one, where we understand exactly what the trajectory is, what we would be doing, what the parameters within which our authority arise, and we can get an opportunity then to challenge, to accept, and to advance in terms of procedure. Member Burke, and then Member Samuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two very quick questions that I wanted to ask. One is to make sure that the matters that are before us are those the only ones outstanding from the session before. That's one. And secondly, as a member sitting on this committee for the first time, I was actually expecting a copy of the Integrity Commission Act.
Will be provided as needed.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm at one with Member Brown-Burke's questions and comments as well. Would also, perhaps it would be useful to have AG brief us on the full remit under the act of the committee, so that we are acting at one with the legislation in what we, actions here. Beyond that, though you're not diving into the reports before us, there is a report before us where I would like you to ask, through your office, Chairman, to request from the AG's chambers where in legislation it would be, or from the Chief Parliamentary Council, wherever I'm able to get the guidance, where in the legislation you could request audited financials from an institution or from an individual involved in an institution that is not required under law to do audited financials.
You want to know?
So if you're not in the financial services industry, or you're not in a publicly traded company, or you're not in a company, you're not a stakeholder in a company that has bonds, you would not be required to have audited financials under the law. But there are requests in one of the reports in front of us for audited financials from companies that, based on the name, do not suggest they would require audited financials. Now, that would send the cost of operating these companies up when they're no doubt stakeholders and shareholders who are not subject to the Integrity Commission Act. So I'd just like to understand where in law you could request audited financials from a company that is not required otherwise in the terms of their registration to produce audited financials.
They want to know whether the law provides for the authority
to request
what the authority is, if there is any.
If there is authority in law, I would like to understand.
That allows for
that request.
That to be a request. Well, so that's diving into the meat of the matter.
But just because we would be diving into these matters at the next sitting rather than requesting it, there are just
no, I have no issue. I have no issue, and I'm grateful. And if there's any other issue of that nature by any member,
I would be prepared, having reviewed these, I'd be prepared to write to you with my issues so they could be passed to the CPC and AG's chambers as appropriate, just to understand so that the next meeting is indeed meaningful as opposed to kicking the can down the road at a later stage.
Thank you. So I wanna thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Member Samuda. I mean, a part of our mandate here is to ensure public confidence is maintained, to ensure that the Commission is acting within the appropriate parameters, and to ensure that processes are fair, transparent, and effective. And so those questions are the kind of probing questions that we are expected to advance. And you were able to read my mind in terms of what I think is the appropriate procedure. I think it would be best for you to write to me, and we will ask the relevant member of the support team to do the work and to advise us so that at the next meeting we can provide some guidance in terms of an opinion, legal or otherwise, relating to that issue. So are there any other questions from members in terms of how we have set out to advance, where we are suggesting, well, not suggesting, we are saying that the committee will receive a legal opinion from our legislative council, and she will have the opportunity to rely on whatever support from AG or otherwise as needed to give us clear direction and guidance in terms of addressing these matters, with particular reference to the specific issues that arise in terms of these matters, particularly the timelines. And we know that the matter, for instance, that was in December, that 30-day period would have passed. I'm aware that it would not have much effect in terms of the substance, so we could still advance, but I do want to have specific guidance since this is the first sitting of our committee, just to be assured that our steps are in accordance with the law, and that if we need to remedy any matters, that we are taking the right step to remedy them. Thank you. All right. We need to set.
And I'm also assuming that when that brief is to be done, that we will get something in writing before, so that we could peruse in contemplation of the discussion. Okay, thank you.
But thank you for the clarity, important. And we have that on record. All right, so in terms of the next convenient date, Clerk, or are you proceeding in what's the dates that are available? Do we need to? I'm wondering, members, if given the fact that we don't have the full slate of members, if it would be wise to set it now, or otherwise we use the usual procedure of being perhaps asked while we are in Parliament, when most of the members will be there, to see if we can get the most convenient date. Would that be? All right, so in terms of Agenda 6, that item, that date will be set in accordance. Yes, item 7, thanks. That date will be set in accordance with the, perhaps the questions asked of the other members when we are in Parliament. All right? One second. All right, so we'll get that date agreed by all members at another time, and then we'll be able to set. It looks like we're moving into April in terms of the next date, which will give us enough time to do the work in terms of preparation and to be sufficiently guided so we can have our steps ordered correctly. Again, very quickly, members, I want to thank you for attending. It was never intended for us to be too long today. The committee that supports us will or should be ready. I get the feeling that this Oversight Committee is going to be very active. I think we're going to do some good work for this session. I expect that with the complement of members who are here, including members who I know as being very cerebral, very detailed and focused, it is my expectation that we will be relying on the research officers, relying on the legal officers and clerk, and that we'll get some work done to make sure that the mandate of the committee is achieved. It is our goal to ensure that this commission is strong, and that the commission is effective, and that the commission is not abused or used in any way outside of the parameter of the law. So thank you, members. I want to again welcome you to this committee. For those of you who are new, all three of you are new? Yes? All three of you are new? New members to the committee? He was here in spirit. We could hear him. He wasn't here physically, but he's always here, hanging over your head. I could hear you when I sat there at another time. But I do want to thank you, and I want to again, on behalf of all of the committee members, just express our appreciation to the members who served before, particularly those who are no longer on the committee, but I know that they still act as a reference and a resource for all of us as needed. In that regard, we can move to 9, which is the adjournment, and that's it. So we adjourn until a date to be set. Where's the motion? Oh, yes. If we could, yes, yes. If you could ask, yes. We had the motion for adjournment. We ask that we have at least so moved by Minister Samuda. All right. Does it have to be seconded by Member Campbell? That said, thank you, members. Appreciate you being on the committee. Looking forward to some good work.
People always say government must be held accountable. But it's whose job to keep government accountable? And what that really mean? Well, you see, when ministers and public officials have to provide answers for decisions made and can face consequences for those actions and decisions, that means they're being held.
To be honest, sometimes I actually have no idea what's going on until I
Warning hit came before the building was struck, sending a plume of grey smoke over the city. More strikes followed, shaking the windows of the building where our colleagues are currently reporting from. We'll have more on that story as those developments continue to come into us from Beirut. Well, the stories of those who've been leaving Iran have been documented, and we'll have more of those throughout the course of the afternoon here on BBC News. And of course, there's also a huge Iranian diaspora around the world. It's estimated that some 4 to 5 million live outside the country, not including second-generation Iranians. And it's thought around 114,000 Iranians live here in the UK. So let's get the thoughts of one Iranian who is here, Ashkan, who runs a payment company which specialises in personal and humanitarian remittances involving Iran. Thank you for joining us here on BBC News. First of all,
thank you for having me.
I'm wondering how your friends and family back home are doing.
Well, what I'm hearing from contacts inside Iran is a mixture of hope, fear, trauma, and determination. Well, January was a turning point. After that crackdown, many people felt that any hope of reform had died. So human rights groups described the mass killing of unprecedented scale, and there remains a serious dispute over the full death tolls, but the estimates are within tens of thousands. And it is not in dispute that the repression was massive and nationally traumatizing. At the same time, people do not feel protected now. They describe checkpoints, intimidations, phone searches, internet blackout, and complete lack of basic wartime civil protection. And the bigger point is that Many Iranians want a normal, progressive, internationally connected country. They want dignity, accountability, and future, and they are fighting for it now.
What did you make of that statement, if we can call it that, from the new Supreme Leader? We didn't see him talk, we just heard a statement. What was your feeling on that?
Well, I wish he could speak more Farsi than Arabic. It was a bunch of meaningless words. At least it did not make much of a sense to me. It kind of demonstrated that he does not have the charisma of a true leader. He cannot even be presented at the TV, in the TV. I was very disappointed. It kind of shows how hardline he is. Also, at the same time, the other thing that it shows is that the current regime doesn't have a proper roadmap. There is no goal. There is no ambition for a future. So if you are, for example, a supporter of the regime, what are you fighting for? There is no clear roadmap of the goal, the end goal of where are you taking the country? What would be the end goal, even if you win this war?
And not having an end goal is also a criticism of the American president.
Yes, obviously, because they are fighting a fight of existence. They are not fighting a fight for the future of the country. And it is quite obvious that this leader is not there to create a future for any Iranian. He's there to just sustain the Islamic ideology and the Islamic regime.
OK, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us, Ashkan. And of course, we do hope that your friends and family back in Iran are staying safe and doing OK. We do appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
Well, as we've been hearing, the continuing conflict has caused oil prices to fluctuate. In a moment, we'll be live in India assessing the impact there. But first, Peter Ruddick's been looking at the fallout here in the UK.
Dozens of countries, including the UK, have agreed to release a record 400 million barrels of oil from emergency reserves in order to ease supply fears and soaring prices. That still only amounts to around 3 or 4 days' worth of supply, and it could take more than 60 days to reach the market. That, plus the continued strikes by Iran on oil tankers, continues to put pressure on the wholesale price. And it's that which feeds through to drivers' prices at the pumps. This was the situation yesterday. Petrol, on average, up nearly 7 pence since the conflict began. Diesel up by even more. This level nearly 15 pence higher in the same period. And diesel prices more generally, crucial, of course, for haulage firms and farmers. Why has this all happened so quickly? Well, petrol retailers say forecourts only hold a few days' supply. As soon as it's sold out, they have to buy more and they are beholden to the higher wholesale price. The regulator, though, the government, both say they are keeping a close eye on these prices. And it's also been the most turbulent period for mortgages since the impact of the Liz Truss mini-budget. Hundreds of products have been withdrawn in the past few days. The average rate on 2-year fixed deals is now back just above 5%. As with petrol, that rate just an average. There is a week to go until a Bank of England rate decision. So again, why has this happened already? Well, mortgages are based on the bank's rate, but also on government borrowing costs and the cost that banks charge each other. They've been going up, and that also drives the market. Before the US-Israel war with Iran began, analysts had been expecting an interest rate cut next week, maybe even 2 this year. Those very uncertain now. Markets, all of us, are having to balance words, the US president saying war is nearly complete, with actions. Those shots of oil tankers on fire.
That's Peter Ruddick there. Well, as we've been discussing, around a fifth of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. The current conflict continues to disrupt energy shipments the world over. Well, in India, supplies of liquefied petroleum gas have fallen as a consequence. It's forced restaurants to cut menus, shorten hours, and in some cases shut down altogether. Well, nearly half of India's crude oil imports, along with a large share of its gas and petroleum shipments, normally pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which is effectively closed by the conflict. But the country has also relied on Russian oil. And despite pressure from the US to reduce its imports from Russia, as the war began, America eased India's embargo, granting India a 30-day waiver to buy sanctioned Russian oil. Well, today, India's Minister of Petroleum said that crude imports not coming through the Strait of Hormuz have risen to approximately 70% of crude imports. That's up from 55% before the conflict began. All of this comes just a day after G7 leaders ruled out easing sanctions on Russia. Well, let's discuss this in a bit more detail by speaking to Sumit Ritola, who's a senior analyst at the maritime intelligence firm Kepler. Welcome to BBC News. So when we heard from India's petroleum minister saying that about 70% of India's oil doesn't come through the Strait of Hormuz, it begs the question, where is it coming from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I will not go into the details of 70% or 60% of both. But as of now, the Strait of Hormuz is very critical to India. And India used to import, like as you also mentioned, around 50%, or like if I give a number to it, around 2.6 million barrels per day of crude. And as of now, like post the waiver lifted by US, I think Indian refiners have picked up incremental volumes of Russian barrels that was floating around in and across India and Indian Ocean.
So in essence, Sumit, Russia's back in the game.
Yeah, it is. I think it was never out of the game also. Like if you look at from December, January, February, it was still the...
Imagine being able to build anything just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform made for anyone with an idea and a drive.
Looking at our predictive modeling and talking to different market intelligence, I think Russian volume this month will be all-time high, even like since India started importing Russian barrels. We might be looking at 2.2, 2.3, or even greater than 2 million barrels a day of crude imports from Russia.
And that's really interesting, Sumit, because of course the fact that Russia in the past and India has relied on Russian oil in the past was a bone of contention for President Trump in recent months, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. If you look at India drastically recalibrated their Russian volumes, like from 1.8 million barrels a day in November to around just 1 million barrels a day in February this month.
And just how much is the Strait of Hormuz crisis at the moment affecting ordinary Indians? We've talked in that introduction to you about restaurants being forced to shut or close early, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it is. I think we have been hearing a lot in media and all, but I think it's more of a panic situation. People are reacting to whatever information that has been flowing down. So in terms of refined product supply, there is no panic at all. India is largely covered in terms near term in terms of refined product supply. But yeah, there is a variable factor in LPG, and I think it's a matter of concern. That is also, you have seen that government of India, they have been reacting to it with increased refinery supplying more of whatever maximum they can, and with different OMCs looking to import LPG via US, Algeria, Norway and all. But yeah, LPG is a concern for now.
Sumit Ritola, thank you very much for taking us through the India perspective on that. And it's interesting to hear that India is increasing its purchase of Russian oil as a consequence. As we close this hour, let's take you back to those live images from Beirut there. You can see those strikes in the centre of the city, of the capital there. Israeli strikes hitting a building around a kilometre away from the centre of the city. Our teams on the ground have been posting about what they've been seeing. You can go to the BBC News website. We'll also have more after a very short break. Do stay with us.
You're with BBC News Live and our continuing coverage of the US-Israeli war with Iran. I want to bring you this latest update from the UK Defence Secretary. In the last hour, we've been hearing from John Healey. He's been on a visit to the UK's military headquarters in Northwood in Hertfordshire, where he's received a briefing on the latest situation in the Middle East. He said he's been discussing the situation in the Strait of Hormuz with military planners and allies. He told reporters it had become clearer that Iran may have been mining the strait. A reminder that in the last 12 hours or so, more cargo ships have been attacked in the Gulf, apparently by Iran. 2 tankers were hit near Iraq, while a container ship was struck near the UAE. Now, Iranian state media say Iranian forces were behind at least one of those strikes. Asked whether Royal Navy warships could be involved in escorting tankers in the region, the Defence Secretary said that any potential action in the future would have to be done in close coordination with allies because it was a shared international concern, adding that the fastest way of reopening the Strait of Hormuz was through de-escalation in the conflict. Let's take a listen.
We've seen the reports, haven't we, that the Iranians have started mining the straits. We've seen the reports overnight of more civilian commercial ships that have been attacked, unarmed, doing their normal business. This is a major escalation from Iran. It is a breach of international law. It's a very serious situation that is having an impact on oil prices and the cost of living for everyone. Now, I've already got pre-positioned in the region from before this conflict some autonomous mine hunting systems, and I've been talking to the planners today about additional options that we could bring to bear alongside allies if action is needed. In the circumstances of conflict, it's very hard to demine any waters, and the best thing for reopening the straits, restarting the shipping, is a de-escalation of the conflict, is a restoration of the stability and confidence in the region, and for allies that want to see Western ships sailing again through the Straits of Hormuz to be working together to that end.
In further comments, he said British forces based at a coalition base in Iraq shot down 2 drones overnight. However, a number of drones did hit the base in Erbil, and there had been reports of a number of US casualties, he said. He said he's been told that there was a definitive link between Iran and Russia in the way that attack drones were being used. Mr. Healy later told reporters the Iranian drone attacks have the hallmark of the way Russia is attacking Ukraine.
From the point at which Iran started hitting back indiscriminately and widespread, we've had a team at the base in Erbil that's been pulling down drones, protecting themselves, but also protecting the base and other service people that they serve with there. It's part of a big operation stepping up our defences in the region from January onwards, and responding then when we saw the nature of the Iranian retaliation, widespread civilian, military, against many countries that just had no involvement in the conflict. And it's my job to make sure that we can protect our British personnel, our British citizens in the region, but also that we work as we have done to help defend our allies there too. 13 days into this conflict and the Iranian hit back across the region, I'm pleased to be able to say at least there's been no yet British casualties. There were reports of American casualties in northern Iraq overnight. The early reports suggest they're not serious, and I'm sure the Americans will report further on that.
Hello, I'm Regini Vaidyanathan. Iran's state television has broadcast a message attributed to the newly appointed supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. While that message was read by an announcer, Khamenei was not seen or heard, and it gave no indication as to the state of his health. There have been some reports saying that he was injured in the attack which killed his father nearly a fortnight ago. Well, in the message, he said Iran would avenge the blood of its martyrs and continue to close the Strait of Hormuz.
And It's also certain the leverage of blocking the Strait of Hormuz must continue to be used. Studies have been conducted regarding the opening of other fronts in which the enemy has very little experience and would be highly vulnerable. Activating these fronts would take place if the wartime situation persists and in accordance with broader strategic considerations. Our aim is actually to make them fail in a very regrettable way. The enemy is actually very vulnerable. They cannot open any new fronts, and we are going to open new fronts against them if deemed necessary.
Well, joining me in the studio is our diplomatic correspondent, Caroline Hawley. So, Caroline, in some ways, quite a curious message, because we didn't hear or see from him, did we?
I think, as expected, it was a message of defiance. The question is, did he even write it? He certainly didn't deliver it, but, you know, it may be, we don't know, that he had the help of the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, who he's allied with. It didn't tell us anything about his condition. I mean, we did learn some things, but it certainly raises many, many questions. He mentions that his father and his wife and sister were killed. He doesn't mention his mother. And we're now hearing that his mother wasn't actually killed, as we had initially heard in those airstrikes on the opening day of the war. It's interesting to hear some of the way he expresses himself, because he talks about his devoted wife being, he says, I have entrusted her to the caravan of martyrs. So that's the kind of language he's using, a lot of religious language. And he calls himself a humble servant. He addresses Iran's allies in the region, the so-called axis of resistance. He mentions Gaza. He mentions the Houthis in Yemen. He mentions militias in Iraq, and he says they are an inseparable part of the values of the Islamic Revolution. As you said, he talks about revenge. He said some of that has already been taken. He said it's not just vengeance for the death of his father, the late supreme leader. It's also for the civilians killed. And he mentions in particular the girls, more than 100 girls who died in that school in the southern port of Minab. And other interesting things, I mean, you heard there where he's talking about studies being conducted about opening new fronts. He says other fronts where the enemy has little experience and would be vulnerable. He addresses neighbouring countries. He says we want friendly relations with them, but they are the hosts of US bases, and he says they will still be attacked, and he advises those neighbouring countries to shut down the US bases. He talks about the enemy, this is his word, enemy having military and financial bases. I was interested to see that. And then in terms of some of the rest of the language, he says that he was honoured to see the body of his father after he was killed. And then he said he heard that his father, on his uninjured hand, had his fist clenched. So a kind of message there of the defiance carrying on from father to son. But I was also interested that he just said that he'd heard that. Did he not see it? So how close was he to his father at the time? And I think the key question is, what is his state of health? And we learned nothing about that from this.
Yeah, and of course we still haven't seen him. We've only heard from him today.
Absolutely.
Caroline, thank you very much for the very latest on that. Well, in addition to striking Iran, the Israeli military has launched a fresh wave of attacks on targets they say are linked to the Iranian-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon. Well, let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, John Donison. John, we've been seeing the images of those vast plumes of smoke over central Beirut. Just tell us more about what we are hearing.
Yeah, just in the last hour, the Israeli military announced a fresh wave of strikes, and they seem to be pushing further into Beirut. I know our team there, they say one of the strikes was just about a kilometre from where they're staying, right in the centre of town. So no longer just those southern suburbs of Beirut where Hezbollah has its stronghold. We had the strike this morning right on the Corniche, which is the promenade, the road that runs along the seafront in Beirut. 8 people killed there in a strike by the IDF. So definitely they're continuing with their air campaign, and at the same time they're expanding their operation in the south and ordering more people to evacuate in areas where previously they've never said issued evacuation orders so far north. So you now have hundreds of thousands of people displaced, many of them heading north towards the capital. Where they're going to go, we don't know. And then in Beirut, in the south of Beirut, in the suburbs there, people being told to evacuate as well.
Yeah, and we just had an updated death toll as well from the Lebanese health minister, pushing that death toll since the 2nd of March now to nearly 700 killed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge toll, and there's no sign really at the moment that Israel is prepared to stop. I think even if the war ends in Iran, which Donald Trump seems to be signaling is something that he might be prepared to do soon, I think there's every chance that Israel will continue in Lebanon. We have had calls from Israeli politicians today to occupy southern Lebanon, something which would require a lot of troops. It would require much more force to go in, and something that I'm not sure would be terribly sustainable. We were up there, just a few days ago, right up on that border, and we did see troops massing, and we heard what were very heavy exchanges of fire just the other side of the border. But Israel Katz, Israel's defense minister today saying that if the Lebanese government can't disarm Hezbollah, then Israel would be prepared to go in and do it for them.
OK, John Donnison, for the moment, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on what we are seeing in Beirut. You can see the images next to me on the screen, and you can scan the QR code in if you want to get more on the live page. But now let's get an overview of the situation across the region. Let's speak to our correspondent, Barbara Pletasher, who is in Doha for us. So, Barbara, just tell us what's been happening where you are and across the Persian Gulf.
Virginia, the main things that happened across the Persian Gulf today were these attacks on the ships. Three more ships were attacked, two of them off the southern coast of Iraq near Basra port, and one of them off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. Two of them bursting into flames and having to have crew evacuated, and one crew member dying. And then on top of that, you had the Iraqis and Oman closing down oil terminals. So again, another avenue for exporting oil closed down, not just the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. So those have been the focus really here in the region because of the oil prices, because of the concern about how this is affecting the global economy, and there will have been a lot of attention paid to the leader of to the words of Moshtaba Khamenei that he was going to continue with this policy of keeping the Hormuz Strait closed, because that is a way to cripple or to affect the world economy, given the oil and gas, the blockage of the oil and gas exports.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about that. And is there any diplomacy going on behind the scenes to try and end the conflict? Because, of course, countries like where you are have been key brokers when it comes to trying to get talks on a peace situation.
Yeah, the Qataris had been very involved in that, and when we ask them about it now, they say we are still, we want de-escalation. We still are committed to mediation. But the spokesperson for the foreign ministry said the other day we don't really essentially have time to do that because we're so busy defending ourselves. You know, there was an attempt at de-escalation at the weekend when the Iranian president came out and apologized to the regional states. And what happened after that is that the members of the Gulf Cooperation Council were meeting to draft a statement in reply as part of a plan to try to ease tensions and bring calm. And yet the attacks continued. In fact, we were told even as they were writing it, there were attacks continuing. So that ended with nothing, and I think that has jaded them quite a lot. There is quite a lot of feeling amongst the Gulf states that Iran is isolating itself. You know, before the war, there were differences of opinion about how to approach Iran, different types of relationships. They have really united right now in criticizing Iran and warned it that it is miscalculating and isolating itself. We'll see what sort of diplomatic initiatives emerge. Again, the Qataris say that at the end of the day, these things will be resolved by dialogue, but we haven't seen any signs of that happening right now, and certainly the message from Moshtaba Khamenei, they will have listened to carefully. He said that the attacks on the U.S. bases in their countries would continue. He did say this is not against our neighbors. We want to have we want friendship between ourselves and our neighbors, and we're only targeting the U.S. bases. But he said, but we will continue doing that. And of course, they haven't just done that. The Gulf states have made very clear they have also hit civilian and energy infrastructure. So he had a sort of slight tone of trying to signal that he didn't want to alienate the neighboring states, but that the policies would continue, and that is what the Gulf states will be paying attention to.
Okay, Barbara Pletasher in Doha. For the moment, thank you very much for that update. Well, UK bases in northern Iraq and in Baghdad were struck a number of times by Iranian drones on Wednesday night. We're getting that from the UK Defence Secretary John Healey, who's been discussing the situation in the region with military planners and allies. He gave us more details on how British forces are dealing with the threat from Iran.
From the point at which Iran started hitting back indiscriminately and widespread, we've had a team at the base in Erbil that's been pulling down drones, protecting themselves, but also protecting the base and other service people that they serve with there. It's part of a big operation stepping up our defences in the region from January onwards, and responding then when we saw the nature of the Iranian retaliation, widespread civilian, military, against many countries that just had no involvement in the conflict. And it's my job to make sure that we can protect our British personnel, our British citizens in the region, but also that we work as we have done to help defend our allies there too. 13 days into this conflict and the Iranian hit back across the region, I'm pleased to be able to say at least there's been no yet British casualties. There were reports of American casualties in northern Iraq overnight. The early reports suggest they're not serious, and I'm sure the Americans will report further on that.
Defence Secretary John Healey there. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Burcu Ozcelik, a senior research fellow for Middle East security within the International Security Department at RUSI. That's a UK defence and security think tank. Welcome to BBC News. First of all, what are your thoughts on what we've been hearing from John Healey and, of course, this news that British troops at a base in Iraq have come under attack?
Well, it's another sign that the escalation ladder continues to climb. It's very concerning, first and foremost, that the Iraqi Kurdistan area of Iraq, which has been historically a beacon of stability relative to the rest of the country, is coming under fire now. And of course, that British personnel may have been injured or would have been targeted is highly concerning. Iraq, of course, is an interesting case in that it has been dragged into the conflict. Iran has long-standing and entrenched interests in Iraq. It has been a highly influential external state, a neighbor in Iraq since post-2003. And so Iran wants to both draw Iraq into the conflict and exact punishing consequences on U.S.
Remember your dreams, your future, your education? Has private student loan debt destroyed those dreams? It doesn't have.
And there's been a lot of speculation about whether the CIA would be working to arm Kurdish forces. At the moment, it doesn't look like that's happened yet. But what is your assessment of whether that might be the next thing that happens?
Well, there was a number of reports, as you've mentioned, and statements by White House officials that this was something that was being considered seriously. There seems to have been a U-turn taken, and there's some speculation that that would have come from Turkey's perspective, which sees it problematic and a national security threat if Kurdish armed groups enter into the fray inside Iran. There was also a lot of pushback, notably from Iranian groups, both inside the country and outside, concerned about whether that kind of activity arming the Kurdish groups or others might lead to the fragmentation of Iran itself and potentially a spiraling series of insurgencies, possibly leading to civil war. So that doesn't appear to have been a highly popular course of action at this stage. I think it's premature to say that it's probably been taken off the table entirely. I think it's probably one of the likely courses of action that the United States will continue to consider. depending on ongoing assessments of whether the US and Israel are meeting their military objectives inside Iran. We're still in a very fluid situation, and the possibility of supporting certain groups inside the country might still be on the table.
Okay.
However unpopular that seems to be.
Dr. Burcu Ozcelik from RUSI, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on the situation there. Well, there's loads more on the BBC News website. We've also got the latest, of course, on what we are seeing in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. We'll have more on that in a moment. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Well, as we've already touched on, there's been further volatility in the price of oil after 3 more commercial ships were attacked in the Gulf. The conflict between the US, Israel and Iran is threatening passage through the Strait of Hormuz, which is, as we've been saying, one of the most important sea routes when it comes to energy exports worldwide. Around 3,000 ships a month and a fifth of the world's supply of oil and gas would normally pass through the strait. That's about 20 million barrels of oil per day. Well, Ben Chu from the BBC Verify team has been looking at the latest of what we know of these strikes and indeed the economic consequences.
3 more ships were hit in the Gulf overnight on Wednesday. This is verified footage of the Zephyros and the Safe Sea Vishnu near Qasr port in southern Iraq. But let's take a step back. Here's the approximate location of 18 ships, 10 tankers and 8 other commercial vessels hit in the region since the war began on the 28th of February. Not all of these have been visually identified by us, but the dots have been reported to maritime bodies. And this gives a sense of how broad the area of danger is to shipping, with strikes deep in the Gulf off the coast of Kuwait and Iraq, and also here in the Gulf of Oman. Though this is the most crucial area, the Strait of Hormuz, which at its narrowest is just 24 miles wide. Ships carrying oil, but also natural gas, fertilizer, and vitally important industrial products such as helium and sulfur have to pass through this point to get out into the wider ocean and supply customers around the world. Now, here's what's happened to traffic through that strait. It compares traffic on the 27th of February, the day before the first US and Israeli strikes on Iran, with the traffic on the 11th of March. And you can see a massive drop in daily ship movements through the strait. This is despite Donald Trump pledging on the 3rd of March that the US would ensure the free flow of energy through the strait, though some ships have apparently made it through. The latest data from the ship tracking firm Marine Traffic has identified a total of 4 vessels passing through the strait since Monday. But analysts say that until traffic starts to flow in large volumes through the Strait of Hormuz again, this crisis will not be over.
That's Ben Chu from the BBC Verify team, and I'm just seeing that the oil price has risen further this afternoon, ticking up to $101 a barrel. That's an increase of 10% today. Well, earlier we heard from Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who said that the lever of blocking the Strait of Hormuz should still be used. And of course, we will keep tracking oil prices throughout the afternoon. Now, the European Union's approved sanctions on 19 Iranian officials and entities, saying it sends a message to Tehran that its future cannot be built on repression. The bloc's foreign policy chief, Kaya Kallas, has told the BBC that the conflict is having an effect on Europe. Speaking to my colleague Sarah Montague on Radio 4's World at One, she explained the EU position on whether the US-Israeli attack on Iran is a breach of the UN Charter.
I'm not the judge or a legal institution to really assess that. But at the same time, the international law gives you two rights, two justifications to use force. One is self-defense, and the other one is under the UN Security Council resolution. So whoever uses force has to justify that it is under those two provisions. If not, it is against the international law.
There was the strike on the girls' school, and Georgia Maloney again yesterday was saying how important it is to establish responsibility for what she described as a massacre. What is your understanding at the moment of who conducted that strike on the girls' school?
Well, of course, we are not conducting the investigations, but it is clear to us that under the international humanitarian law, civilians cannot be targeted. And, whoever uses force has to really use the utmost care that civilians are not hit. So this is, of course, in the wars, civilians are hit very often, but they should not be targeted.
Increasingly looks like this was that it was a US strike. One presumes, obviously not intentional. If it is, what happens then?
Well, again, I come back to my point of accountability. If there is a breach of law or, international humanitarian law, then there also has to be accountability. And this is also in a broader sense, because if there is no accountability, if those people who are responsible for this are not held responsible, we will see more of it, because it's a cycle of revenge and retaliation, because people don't see that anybody is held accountable and want to take the law into their own hands, which is definitely not good for the stability.
How do you hold the US, how do you hold President Trump accountable?
Well, this is, I think, a broader discussion of the international law as such. As I was saying, the UN Charter is very clear, and everybody signs up to the UN Charter. If you think about the big international crisis that we have had in history, after the First World War, there was a League of Nations so that there wouldn't be any wars anymore. It didn't really work. So after the Second World War, there was the United Nations that was established. Now, as I said, the UN Charter is very clear, but I think now in this big international crisis that we are at right now, since Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and all the other wars that have started after this, we really need to develop the international law further so that there would be accountability, so that nobody would be above the law, because the aim is that there wouldn't be wars started, and also these people who are starting the wars would feel that there's also responsibility for them.
Kaya Kalla speaking to Sarah Montague then. Well, let's show you these pictures that have just come into us from our team in Beirut, the Lebanese capital. I'm going to show you these images. These show the moment that those Israeli strikes hit the capital. So they come from a short while ago, but you can see the impact there. It really gives you a sense of what's happening there. It follows a warning from the Israeli military that it would be targeting a building. Now, Israel's military described that as a facility belonging to Hezbollah. We've also heard from Lebanon's health ministry now that the death toll numbers of people killed since conflict resumed on the 2nd of March is 687. We've got more on oil prices with the business news coming up next. Do stay with us here on BBC News.
Well, the war is raising concerns around the world over security, the global economy and the humanitarian impact. Kaya Kallas, Vice President of the European Commission, spoke to my colleague Sarah Montague on Radio 4's The World at One. She explained the European Union position on whether the US-Israeli attack on Iran is a breach of the UN Charter.
I'm not the judge or a legal institution to really assess that. But at the same time, the international law gives you two rights, two justifications to use force. One is self-defense, and the other one is under the UN Security Council resolution. So whoever uses force has to justify that it is under those two provisions. If not, it is against the international law.
There was the strike on the girls' school, which, and Giorgia Meloni again yesterday was saying how important it is to establish responsibility for what she described as a massacre. What's your understanding at the moment of who conducted that strike on the girls' school?
Well, of course, we are not conducting the investigations, but it is clear to us that under the international humanitarian law, civilians cannot be targeted. And, whoever uses force has to really use the utmost care that civilians are not hit. So this is, of course, in the wars, civilians are hit very often, but they should not be targeted.
Increasingly looks like this was that it was a US strike. One presumes, obviously not intentional. If it is, what happens then?
Well, again, I come back to my point of accountability. If there is a breach of law or, international humanitarian law, then there also has to be accountability. And this is also in a broader sense, because if there is no accountability, if those people who are responsible for this are not held responsible, we will see more of it, because, it's a cycle of revenge and retaliation, because people don't see that anybody is held accountable and want to take the law into their own hands, which is definitely not good for the stability.
How do
Oil back above $100 a barrel, despite plans for the biggest ever release of emergency reserves, as Iran vows to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. Supply chain fears, freight rates soar as businesses scramble for alternative routes for their goods and materials. And tourism chaos. The global industry tells us it's losing well over $500 million a day from disruption to the Gulf's vital airline hubs. Hello there, welcome to Business Today. I'm Ty Genwright. We are, of course, focusing on the economic impact of the war in the Middle East, because there's been no relief for oil prices as they continue to trade around $100 a barrel. A statement read out on Iranian state TV, it said, supposedly from its new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, vows that the country will continue to block shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian attacks on ships in the Persian Gulf have rattled energy markets. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it carried out an attack on a US-owned vessel in the Gulf on Thursday morning and released this footage showing a massive explosion followed by a major fire. 3 other ships were attacked in the last 24 hours as well. 2 oil tankers were hit close to Iraq. The Iraqi news agency says that 38 crew members were rescued and 1 person killed. 1 container ship was also hit off the coast of the United Arab Emirates in the Strait of Hormuz. Also adding to the pressure on oil prices, a drone attack on oil facilities in the port of Salalah in Oman. That forced the suspension of operations at the port. Well, let's have a look at how oil is trading right now. In the last few minutes, the benchmark Brent crude for April delivery has gone above $100 a barrel again. It's been hovering around that point all day today. A spokesperson from Iran's military command said on Wednesday that the world should prepare for oil prices of $200 a barrel. That will be well above the highest oil price recorded in history, which was $147.27 back in July 2008, weeks before the start of the global financial crisis. All of this, understandably, fraying nerves on Wall Street. Our North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury, following the story for us from New York. Michelle, traders have so many contrasting factors, statements to digest, but primarily, it looks like this war is not ending anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think judging by that statement, the off-ramp for this conflict seems further and further away, despite comments obviously earlier this week from President Trump.
Welcome to Wix Harmony. Take the speed of AI and pixel-level control.
What has become clear is that certainly for the price of oil, it is still very much subject to the influence of what is happening in this narrow waterway where ships are struggling to get through and effectively traffic has ground to a standstill. And each time you look at what the price has done, investors sort of trying to calculate how serious the conflict is, how long it might last. But, you know, that is what is driving things at the moment. You mentioned Salalah port. A lot of the ships that were unable to pass through the strait had sort of parked at that port. So obviously that has a knock-on effect, a chilling effect. We continue to see boats unable to pass through there. Oil shipments, particularly the disruption there, I think is the real concern. And so economists are starting to kind of assess what this means for the economy. If this goes on for 3 weeks, if it goes on for 5 weeks, the outcomes are different. But the longer it goes on, the worse it is for the global economy, particularly for importers of oil. There are concerns about what it will do to those economies, whether it could be as damaging as sort of recession. In the US, the fear is of stagflation, that spectre of high inflation and low growth.
Michelle Fleury in New York, thank you very much. Well, global businesses are facing massive disruptions to supply chains and the prospect of much higher prices to transport the materials they need and the goods they sell. Let's remind ourselves of that shipping bottleneck at the heart of this crisis. You can see here how the passage of ships, the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, has ground to a halt since the conflict started. And as Iran steps up attacks on ships, the knock-on effect has been huge for global trade, with hundreds of ships of all types, including cargo vessels, stuck in the Gulf. Insurance rates have soared and major shipping lines are suspending routes through the region, sending businesses around the world scrambling for alternatives. And with aviation also affected, jet fuel costs nearly twice what they were before the war. Those come at a price. The cost of shipping goods by air between Asia and Europe has jumped by almost half since the beginning of the war. This according to the global freight forwarding and logistics company Flexport. And Flexport's CEO Ryan Peterson joins me now from San Francisco. Thanks for being with us today, Ryan. We've been talking about the scramble to find alternative routes. How much damage could be mitigated by doing so, do you think?
Yeah, hey, great to be here. We are seeing, as you said, prices continue to rise on especially air freight, Asia to Europe, and importantly, the ships, if you want to go by ocean, are not able to go through the Red Sea, and that's been true for a while. Although in February, Maersk had just started to resume service through the Red Sea for container shipping, and now they've paused that, and so transit times is just so long. So you see a lot of brands that are trying to get product into Europe where they can't right now, but there are alternatives. So one thing that we've done is create a new kind of sea-air solution where we actually bring it on an express container line by ocean to the United States, to Los Angeles, then do a fast transfer to air freight at LAX and fly it to Heathrow. So you're seeing people get creative to solve this problem. It will mitigate some, especially those in a pinch, but largely it's going to be difficult to kind of move the full capacity, and air freight prices are really soaring, so it won't solve the problem for everybody.
Yeah, there must be some industries out there with tight margins who can't afford that premium that comes with air freight. Who are you thinking of there?
Yeah, well, where you can't afford it, I mean, all kinds of products will continue to ship by ocean and just have to plan for the long transit time. It takes 45 days or so from Asia to Europe via ocean going around the southern tip of Africa. And so, I mean, brands are kind of used to that at this point. It's the air freight where suddenly so much of air cargo capacity, it's about 18% of all the air cargo capacity is owned by Middle Eastern airlines. Think Emirates, Qatar, Etihad as the big ones. And that's basically grounded, although there's some green shoots. They started to resume service earlier this week, but now with some of the new attacks in Dubai and elsewhere in the region, it's hard to see how that comes back to life anytime really soon.
Okay. Ryan Peterson from Flexport, thank you very much for sharing those insights with us here on Business Today. Well, it is an understatement, I think, to say that industry leaders are becoming increasingly worried about the Iran situation. The Global Business Group, the Conference Board, is warning that inflation could jump, forcing higher interest rates and causing economic growth to stagnate if high oil prices and trade disruption continue. Steve Odland is Chief Executive of the Conference Board, and he joins me now from New York. Thanks for being with us today, Steve. You know, the war is still relatively new. We don't have clear data yet. So how much certainty can you have when you say it is going to push up inflation in a meaningful way?
Well, we know that the war is having a significant impact on the global economy already. You just talked about the Strait of Hormuz, and there's 1,000 ships sitting there waiting to transport their goods through that strait right now. But you have to look at CEO uncertainty. Uncertainty was very high before this. Coming out of the COVID situation, the supply chain issues, high inflation over the past year. There have been the trade wars, the tariffs. And so CEOs are essentially frozen in their investments. They're not hiring people. They're not making investments in capital the way they should. They're hoarding cash because they don't know what their borrowing rates are going to be. They don't know what their costs are going to be. They don't know whether their supply chains are going to be put back and when. So you then turn to the Iran situation. You have 25% of the global production of oil coming from this region. Most of it transits the Strait of Hormuz. Most of that goes to Asia, but it is impacting prices of oil and derivative products throughout the world as a result of the supply hit. That is in turn hitting everything. And it's whether you're talking about energy, whether you're talking about gasoline prices, but food in particular. Packaging, transportation of food, the fertilizers, all of that is getting hit. So you're going to see inflation throughout the world in all of these basic commodities, and it's going to spare no one.
And at home in the United States, the world's most powerful economy, obviously the economy that Donald Trump, should we say, listens to the most. What is the likelihood, do you think, of a recession or stagflation, as our correspondent there was talking about a few minutes ago?
Yeah, well, anytime in the U.S. that you get below 2% growth or above 2% inflation, it's the magic 2 and 2, you then start to feel the effects of it, even if it's not technically a recession or even if it's not technically stagflation. The issue is that our projections at the Conference Board are that GDP growth will be hit by this, somewhere between 10 and 30 basis points, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a massive amount. We also think that inflation will rise by an incremental 20 to 30 basis points. That has a knock-on effect with the central bank then of not proceeding with their rate reductions, which had been forecast here in the first part of the year, and that's been pushed back. So then borrowing costs, mortgage costs, all of those issues rise to the fore as well. So it is a pinch point on the economy. The key thing here, Ty, is to get the Strait of Hormuz open and to get the goods and oil flowing again.
And today, we heard Donald Trump say that the U.S. economy could benefit from higher oil prices because it's such a significant oil producer, also launching investigations into some U.S. trade partners to justify the next wave of U.S. tariffs. What are your thoughts on the timing of all that?
Well, look, it all goes together in the soup of the global economy. And, tariffs or taxes, these are raising costs for U.S. consumers. So all of this is adding to the inflation concerns. It's all adding to the supply chain concerns. But most of all, you have to look at CEO uncertainty. They don't know how to plan. And if you can't plan for the next year, the next 2 years, there's no investment going to be made. There's no hiring that's going to be made.
Steve.
So it essentially freezes the economy.
Steve Odland from the Conference Board, thank you for sharing those thoughts with us today. Finally, let's stay with the impact of the war, because the global travel industry is warning it's losing over $500 million a day from disruption in the Middle East. The World Travel and Tourism Council says spending is down by $600 million a day during what would normally be a busy period for Middle Eastern travel. Up to 300,000 airline passengers normally travel through the Gulf each day via global aviation hubs in Abu Dhabi, Qatar and Dubai, which of course is the world's busiest airport. That's your business today. I'm Ty Genright. Do stay with us here on BBC News for the latest updates on the impact of this war. Stay with us on BBC News.
Isn't it, actually? Oh, no, you weren't on when I was attacked, were you? This is BBC News. I'm Regina Vaidinarvan. A short while ago, we received a written statement from Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader of Iran. It was voiced up by an anchor on Iranian state TV, and we've translated a part of it where he vows revenge against everyone who's been killed in recent airstrikes on the country. He goes on to say that the bombing of a girls' school in the south of the country on the first day of the conflict has his special attention. Let's have a listen.
Not only our leader, but any member of the nation who has been martyred or will be martyred by the enemies will be added to the file of revenge. Part of the revenge has already been carried out, but it will be completely carried out. Until then, this file will be open.
Well, the impact of the war continues to spread widely, and it's causing oil prices to fluctuate, as we heard in the business just then. Well, Money and Work reporter Peter Ruddock's been looking at what the volatility means for the economy here in the UK.
Dozens of countries, including the UK, have agreed to release a record 400 million barrels of oil from emergency reserves in order to ease supply fears and soaring prices. That still only amounts to around 3 or 4 days' worth of supply, and it could take more than 60 days to reach the market. That, plus the continued strikes by Iran on oil tankers, continues to put pressure on the wholesale price. And it's that which feeds through to drivers' prices at the pumps. This was the situation yesterday. Petrol, on average, up nearly 7 pence since the conflict began. Diesel, up by even more. This level nearly 15 pence higher in the same period. And diesel prices more generally, crucial, of course, for haulage firms and farmers. Why has this all happened so quickly? Well, petrol retailers say forecourts only hold a few days' supply. As soon as it's sold out, they have to buy more and they are beholden to the higher wholesale price. The regulator, though, the government both say they are keeping a close eye on these prices. And it's also been the most turbulent period for mortgages since the impact of the Liz Truss mini-budget. Hundreds of products have been withdrawn in the past few days. The average rate on two-year fixed deals is now back just above 5%. As with petrol, that rate just an average. There is a week to go until a Bank of England rate decision. So again, why has this happened already? Well, mortgages are based on the bank's rate, but also on government borrowing costs and the cost that banks charge each other. They've been going up, and that also drives the market. Before the US-Israel war with Iran began, analysts have been expecting an interest rate cut next week, maybe even 2 this year. Those very uncertain now. Markets, all of us, are having to balance words, the US president saying war is nearly complete, with actions. Those shots of oil tankers on fire.
That's Peter Ruddick there. Well, as the war continues, the US and Israel have intensified attacks targeting Iranian military and security forces in the Kurdish region in the west of Iran. Media reports suggest that America's CIA has been considering arming Kurdish rebels to help topple the regime. The Kurdish opposition leader says they haven't yet received weapons or logistical support. The BBC's GR Gol's been to a secret base of a Kurdish Iranian armed group near the Iranian border with Iraq.
A long drive into the remote mountains along the Iran-Iraq border. We reach an area in Iraqi Kurdistan where Iranian Kurdish fighters have been based for decades. I've come to meet the Kurdistan Free Life Party, or PJAK. Not far from here, on the other side of the border, US and Israeli attacks on Iranian security forces are intensifying. The fighters here are on the highest alert.
This is one of many tunnel networks built by PJAK along the Iran-Iraq border, carved deep into the rock and linked across terrain. Thousands of Kurdish fighters along the border are waiting for 0 hour.
Many of PJAK fighters are battle-hardened with years of experience fighting Islamic State militants across Syria and Iraq. Avin is one of them.
We are morally and ideologically ready to fight. Our party is prepared, and many of our members are already in Iranian Kurdistan. If necessary, I'm ready to go.
These Kurdish fighters say they are struggling for the rights of their marginalized people, but the Iranian regime labels them as terrorists and separatists. Over the past 2 weeks, all eyes have been on Kurdish fighters here, whether they would join the US-Israel war against Iran for their own cause.
So far, we have not received any weapons or logistical support from the US. We maintain some level of contact with the US government, but the actions of international coalitions, particularly the US, who abandoned the Syrian Kurds, have raised doubts and concerns among us.
Many PJAK members fought alongside the US-led coalition against ISIS, losing numerous members in Syria. The memory of the US withdrawing support from Syrian Kurds still lingers. The question now is whether they would trust the US again and join the war against Iran. GR Gol, BBC News, on the Iraq-Iran border.
Now to other news, Anne. In July 2024, a parcel burst into flames just before it was loaded onto a DHL cargo flight.
You're with BBC News Live and our continuing coverage of the US-Israeli war with Iran. I want to bring you this latest update from the UK Defence Secretary. In the last hour, we've been hearing from John Healey. He's been on a visit to the UK's military headquarters in Northwood in Hertfordshire, where he's received a briefing on the latest situation in the Middle East. He said he's been discussing the situation in the Strait of Hormuz with military planners and allies. He told reporters it had become clearer that Iran may have been mining the strait. A reminder that in the last 12 hours or so, more cargo ships have been attacked in the Gulf, apparently by Iran. 2 tankers were hit near Iraq, while a container ship was struck near the UAE. Now, Iranian state media say Iranian forces were behind at least one of those strikes. Asked whether Royal Navy warships could be involved in escorting tankers in the region, the Defence Secretary said that any potential action in the future would have to be done in close coordination with allies because it was a shared international concern.
We've seen the reports, haven't we, that the Iranians have started mining the straits. We've seen the
When the game gets rough and this life just seems so tough, make we talk, my people, make we talk. When this town becomes an ugly place, don't let it erase the smile from your face. Make we talk, people, make we talk. Conversation is the key, a guiding light for you and me. Spark a talk and you will see. Conflict solver A to Z. World leaders master the art of self-defense just by talk. So people, make we talk. Hey, we're living in a world that on ourselves we must depend. Make we talk.